Publisher of Seagull Books, Naveen Kishore. If you could please help me in welcoming them to the stage.
Haven't figured out who's who. This is the astrophysicist. This is what they look like these days. This is Professor Harish Trivedi, and I'm the well-known publisher. And I'm also going to be occasionally wearing two other hats. One that I really wish I could keep on, which is Rohan Murthy, who's missing. I'd love to be Rohan Murthy, funding my own books at the moment. And Rana Dasgupta, who has a medical situation, right? We'll plunge into this straight away. Reading glasses, if you'll excuse me. So this is first of all my Rana hat, in which, in a letter, he has suggested certain things that he would have discussed with this distinguished panel. And one that takes on right away the theme, which is one Indian literature, and I'm quoting him, is a phrase we came up with to communicate an ideal for the prize, the JCV Literature Prize. The idea that we might at a future date be able, through translation, to actually read one Indian literature and not worry about 20 separate literatures or more. May I begin with you, Priya, to get initially your take on this theme itself, and then Harishji, I'll ask you, and then I will suggest my theme, and then we can take it from there. Priya?
Thanks very much. It's a delight to be on this panel. And you might be wondering what's an astrophysicist doing on this panel, right? Aside from the fact that I did write a book for the curious public a couple of years ago. I actually served, I had the pleasure of serving on the jury of the inaugural JCB Prize. So I think responding to the theme of one literature, what was for me exciting about the JCB experience really had to do with the fact of access. Access of great, wonderful, imaginative, beautiful writing in various regional Indian languages. So I grew up in India. My mother tongue is Tamil, but I don't really read literature in it, which is a sorry state of affairs. I read in English and French and Italian, but not in Tamil. And so, bringing literature written in languages that are inaccessible to your average urban Indian, that I see myself as representing, and diasporic Indian, has been really an incredible experience. And I think incentivizing translations in terms, with a prize and so on, is a fantastic idea. So I think the point of access is something that
Access through translation.
Access to translations and the readership. So, it's access to worldviews. It's access to the imagination of people inhabiting different kinds, different portions of Indian reality, right? That is invaluable. And the second point that I really want to make is that, this idea of oneness, one literature, of a canon is something that is very actively debated, at least in the academic setting. At universities like Yale, Yale in particular because of Alan Bloom, we've had this notion of what the Western canon is. And that's what every undergraduate has to study. And the way the progressives and liberals have been jiggling that canon is by just trying to say that this has to be more inclusive. And the canon stays, except we expand the definition of the canon, and we bring in other voices, notably African American voices, Native American voices, voices from post-colonial cultures, and I think the South Asians have made some headway there. My own personal feeling is that we should just disrupt the idea of a canon. It doesn't serve any purpose anymore. And I think all literature is just going to have to be one literature in the future.
So disruption as access.
Absolutely.
Harish, what's your take on it?
Well, for the first couple of minutes, let me share some information with the people here who may or may not have heard of JCB, the new prize in India. The JCB prize is the newest prize, and it is the most lucrative prize of 25 lakh rupees for a book either written in English or translated into English. It's going to be awarded every year. It's the new kid on the block of prizes, but it's the biggest kid, it's the plumpest kid, it's the richest kid. And I wanted to give you some kind of a perspective on what goes with literary prizes. Of course, there's fame. Literary prizes began with the Sahitya Academy Award, so far as I know, in all the Indian languages in 1954 to 55. And the prize money was 5,000 rupees, and it remained 5,000 rupees for very long, and now it is 50,000 rupees.
It sounds like Doordarshan television rates for anchors.
Yeah. And then, in 1965, a new prize came up, the Gyanpith Award. I've been associated with the Sahitya Academy, with the Gyanpith. I'm still in the jury of the Gyanpith, and I'm on the advisory. Thank God I'm not on the jury again to read. How many books?
63 books in 5 months.
Right, yeah. But I'm on the advisory, so there's a perspective that one develops about these. This prize was 1 lakh rupees in 1965, when the Sahitya Academy was only 5,000. Now you ask it's now become 11 lakhs. You ask any writer who wins these prizes, and they will say, oh, the money doesn't mean anything. Partly they're being modest, partly they're reflecting the old conflict between Saraswati and Lakshmi. If you are inspired by the muses, how does money matter? People write for all kinds of reasons, this being the least. Now to the claim that the JCB prize, it has two things. One is the amount of the prize. The other is that publishers who submit entries may submit 4 entries, 2 entries, books originally published in English, and 2 more entries in translation into English from the various Indian languages. And publishers who do not publish translations can submit only 2 entries. I think in due course we might actually think about making it even stricter and say publishers who do not publish translations should not even be allowed to submit, or perhaps allowed to submit only 1. Let's see how strongly we can back translation. How does translation matter in forming a canon, as Priya was talking about? And how does English do it better than other languages? These are 2 other questions, which I'll very briefly touch on. There is a canon of translated works, but before that, there is a canon of original works. Recently, only this year, a book has come out from Routledge, London or New York, edited by Susan Bassnett, great scholar of translation studies. And the book is titled Translation and World Literature. And I was one of the contributors to that. And I made the point there, which I wish to share with you very briefly, that people assume that without translation, world literature cannot exist. I agree with that, and I do not agree with that. Agreeing with that is very simple. Not agreeing with that involves a recognition of the fact that whatever is to be translated already exists. We are not inventing it. So there are literatures in the wide world which are already there, and all these literatures put together can be called world literature. Whether we have access to them or not is a secondary question. Even if I like that, Where did that come from?
That was an
That
endorsement.
contribution, yeah.
Loud move.
Wonderful. We need many voices to constitute a canon. The second thing that one wishes to talk about is, if translations have to constitute the canon of Indian literature, must it be translations into English? There is a perception that a book is actually translated only when it is translated into English. But this neglects the work done for the last 50 years, tremendous amount of work, by the Sahitya Academy, by the National Book Trust, which have been promoting translations from one Indian language into another. The Sahitya Academy, for example, gives awards in 24 languages. As soon as a book wins an award, anybody can propose to translate it into any of the other 23 languages, and provided the translation is not terrible, the Sahitya Academy will undertake to publish it. Similarly, the National Book Trust, they have a scheme called Adan Pradan. They chose many books from 12 major languages, and they made sure that each one of these was translated into the 11 other languages. So it's not as if this canon does not exist, canon of translation from other Indian languages in every Indian language. There is substantial body of translations. One other thing, the last thing I'd say about translation here is, and about English, there is a novel by Premchand called Godan. It was translated into Malayalam and is called Godanam. If it's translated into Bangla, it is again called Godan. In Marathi, it's called Godan. In English, it's called The Gift of a Cow, which sounds very funny. Therefore, there are two translations into English. One is The Gift of a Cow, and the other is Godan, which is not a translation because it doesn't mean anything in English. So let's look at many different canons of Indian literature existing through translation in 24 languages, of which English is only one.
Thank you. Before I ask you to respond to this, it just struck me two interesting things. One is both of you are talking about English as a link language. You're also talking about the fact that the act of translation provides a certain access into a different world, culture, condition, literature. I'm deliberately trying to provoke a different thinking, which is, where is the one literature in this conversation? You have suggested that we translate into a link language. I grew into publishing doing precisely that, which is translating from different Indian languages, the theatre scripts into English, not because I thought that the three of us would go around producing them in English, but it provided access to original languages for theatre practitioners to go back and forth and translate. So I like the fact that these literatures already exist, right? Yep. So it's through language that we will find our way into them, but it's still not, the English here is serving the purpose of a link language. It's not replacing by becoming the one Indian literature. What do you think, Priya?
Yeah, I think, I want to come back to the point that I made before. If the point is really to have access, to have a large number of readers, to read, enjoy, learn from the amazing writing that we have, then I see no reason to drop the idea of a linked language. Right? And I think that what has really changed, what I really mean when I say we are disrupting the canon, is that English becomes a linked language and it doesn't represent anything more. That's it. Right? And that's all we're talking about. It may well be that in 50 years the linked language may be Mandarin, right? I don't know. Who knows? But I think at the moment it serves the purpose. And I think that, there have been all these talks of, books dying and no one's going to read books anymore and so on and so forth. This has been going on in the United States for the last decade. And it's not held out by the sales of books and so on and so forth, the actual data. People are still reading, they're still buying books. So I think the idea of reach, the idea of having a very wide readership and sharing, I think that's much more important than whether you call it one literature or literature translated into English.
Perfect.
Don't you think?
Yeah.
I mean,
Totally,
that's
I
really
complete
what it's
agreement.
about. And I think part of the reason why it's all fraught, obviously for us, is that English is loaded. Colonial past is loaded in the language, but I think we can free ourselves now from the shackles of what English used to represent and just transform it as a link language that still has the kind of reach that no other link language at the moment offers. And as for the translation from one Indian language to another, the translation from one Indian language to another, that is really extremely rich, and that should happen and that should continue. But I still wonder in terms of access, right? I think we have to face up to the reality of the fact that a lot of young people growing up in urban India, what are the languages that they actually read in, right?
Yes, you're perfectly right. This is one of the developments over the last 20 odd years, maybe 30 years, but no longer back than that people are not, more and more people are learning English, more and people are reading in English, and reading very occasionally, not occasionally, but frequently, only in English.
Right.
Anyone in India who's been to an English medium school used to take pride in saying that they cannot read their mother tongue. On the school grounds, in the school classroom, not only classroom, but on the grounds, playgrounds, they were punished if they spoke in the local language. So that's an extension of colonization that we continued in post-colonial times. Anyhow, the fact is that more and more people are learning English, and therefore it's not only a linked language, it has always been a dominant language. I wish there was a linked language that was not at the same time the dominant hegemonic language, but a language that performed the function of linking without exercising great power. I don't know whether it can be done.
Why not? I mean, I think it's up to us to redefine, don't you think? That we can redefine, the point is who gets to tell their stories? Who gets to rule the narrative, right? And if there is a lot of writing in languages other than English, then we've already shifted that, right? I mean, so English is no longer the language of the storyteller or the language in which the story has to be told. So I think that we can quite easily move away from, I think we can unpack and get rid of the baggage that comes with English and refer to it as a mere linked language. And I think those words are important, right? I mean,
Priya, I wish this would happen. I have no hope in hell of this happening. To de-link English from hegemony, from power, which it always exercised for 200 years, I think is a dream. I'm still a dreamer. I once published an article. I've been a professor of English for more than 40 years. I've earned my living through English, but I've earned my bread, but always the ghee on top of it has been Hindi and Sanskrit. So there has been a combination of these two factors. In my own case, I still write with greater pleasure and fluency in Hindi than in English. But this is the personal case. And that is why I'm deeply invested in the idea of what function English performs in our society. I once wrote an article saying English should be abolished in India. And a Hindi novelist, Uday Prakash, wrote a counter article saying he thought that only peasants in India committed suicide and not English professors. But I would make that small sacrifice of my own suicide if number of people have said it before me. One of the greatest intellectuals in India, independent India, Ram Manohar Lohia. No one more intelligent, no one better informed, with socialist principles. But let me get back to the present context. The JCB Prize went to a writer called Benjamin. from
Incidentally
Malayalam.
there
He was
in
sitting
the
there.
audience.
I
We're delighted
I-
to see him.
I had a long conversation with him last evening. And Jasmine Days will bring him the kind of eminence that nothing has brought him before. At the same time, he has his own ideas of what kind of prizes and what kind of recognition that he's won already, which he values as much, if not more. And the book that has really established him was published in 2009, before there was the JCB Prize. And that is Goat Years, Goat Days. Something Adu Jivitam, no? Something like that. Yeah. And that's the book that he would put forward if it were to stake a claim to fame. Now, I told him that I'd love to read that book, and I'd love to read Jasmine Days as soon as they are available in Hindi, because then the Godan effect would kick in. I would know half the words already. Half the words would come in to me untranslated. The cultural basis, Indian literature has always been one, in one sense, that the same cultural ethos and universe prevails all over the territory called India, with very few minor exceptions. There are exceptions. It's not universal, but there are very few and very minor exceptions. And all these words have the same resonances, the same connotations, and that's what we gain in translation, except when things are translated into English.
Just one last thing before we move on. I mean, I have a few ideas about translation that you've thrown up, which would be interesting to discuss. This business of, is there any truth amongst today's generation or even our generation that English, what you talked about, being comfort levels without the baggage is, what if I was to say that I actually grew up thinking this was one more Indian language? You know, I'm very comfortable with Hindi. I can write fluently, read it, Punjabi, all of that. I probably think in all of these, I have my conversations in the old days when I was growing up. So you had a grandmother from UP, and whose son, my father, would speak to her in Hindi, as would I, and she would answer in Punjabi, my mother, who was from Lahore, who would speak to me in English and Punjabi. It was like an interesting sort of thing. So that was my first introduction to translation. But is there any truth in the possibility of us shedding the shackles of all that you dream about and just accepting as it's one more Angrezi as part of the... What do you think?
Me or Priya?
You first.
Me. Yeah. Yeah, you know, we cannot wish English away. Obviously, it's a part of our lives. And Hindi writers, for example, all creative writers in Hindi, all the critics in Hindi, yeah. Yeah.
This is lovely.
We're being driven against the wall. Yeah. For our own good. Yeah. I've never been to such a thunderous session in any festival. Who is reigning on the parade of Indian literature? The gods themselves.
Gosh, the secret punster, Mr. Trivedi.
Yeah. No, English has already won a tremendous degree and amount of acceptance in India. That cannot be denied, and that is growing. So I do not worry about the acceptance of English. What I worry about is some kind of a proportion, some kind of a sense of balance between English on the one hand and the other Indian languages on the other, in terms of prestige, in terms of clout, in terms of, most people in India begin making their money not in English. Ever since commercial television came, over the last 30 odd years, we have seen that the biggest revenue is generated by a news channel not in English but in Hindi. The TRP is the greatest for many Hindi channels. Dainik Bhaskar, which is sponsoring many of the programs here, a Hindi newspaper, is on par with the best-selling newspapers in the world. The Times of India says it's the best-selling English newspaper in the world. They are not the best-selling newspaper in English or other languages in India. They hide that fact. Those are the Indian papers. So let's have let's have a level playing field between English and the other languages. We should not do away with history. We should not erase history. We have got certain advantages out in knowing English, and we should preserve those. But let other languages also bloom and prosper.
I guess the place that I was coming from when I was really talking about disruption of the canon while still retaining English as the link language really comes from other kind of progressive causes that I ride behind, like the feminist cause, right? So for example, when we talk about structural sexism, we really talk about not just getting women to conform to pre-existing institutions and norms, but to completely redefine the norms. I think that's the way you get rid of structural difficulties, structural injustices, or systematic overlooking. And as you said, the sort of the reorganization of the prestige. And that is the sense in which I'm talking about sort of this disruption of the notion of canon and yet retaining, disrupting the canon and retaining English as just as a link language. So I think as far as, the remaking the prestige of other regional languages, it's really up to us.
Yeah.
I think we're like really trying to figure out what to do here. The heavens are pouring.
I want to find out, why isn't the audience going away? Is it raining only on the speakers?
We're like receding into the background. Yeah, maybe we should do that, right? We can continue here.